I didn't raise my voice when the HOA president leaned across the table and accused me of trespassing. She was red-faced, practically shaking with the effort of speaking louder than anyone else in the room. Her lawyer sat beside her, smirking. Like this was already a done deal. Instead of answering, I reached into my folder, slid a worn but perfectly preserved piece of paper across the table, and tapped the embossed county seal with one finger. My mother's name, dated in 1948, was printed clearly at the top. The original deed, notarized, recorded, and untouched. The smirk fell first. Then the president's face drained of color as the lawyer leaned in and whispered something in her ear. I didn't need to say a word. That one piece of paper was louder than anything I could have shouted. I should back up, because that moment didn't come easily. My mother's lot wasn't just a piece of land to me. It was her safe place, her legacy, the one part of her life she had built with her own hands and held on to no matter what came her way. She bought it when she was barely older than I am now, right after she got married. Back then it was nothing but raw land at the edge of town, but she saw what it could become. A small cabin, a garden, and eventually a place for kids and grandkids to gather. By the time I came along, the cabin was already worn at the edges, but it was ours. Summers were spent fishing in the little creek behind the trees. Winters meant stacking firewood and pretending we were pioneers. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. When my mother passed, I didn't see it as inheriting land. I saw it as taking responsibility for her story. I'd drive up on weekends, trim the grass, fix the roof when storms hit. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch alone, hearing her voice in the wind through the pines. I didn't want a subdivision. I didn't want modern development. I wanted quiet, the same quiet she'd carved out for herself 70 years before. For a long time, it stayed that way. Then came the HOA. They weren't there when my mother bought the place, and they weren't there when I was a kid running through the woods. They formed years later, when developers pushed through a cluster of new houses on the other side of the creek and convinced the county to let them form an association. I didn't pay much attention at first. Why would I? I wasn't part of it. My mother's lot had its own recorded deed, its own title chain, but AOAs never seem to know their own limits. They see land and they think it's theirs. The first sign was a letter taped to the old cabin door. It was printed on HOA letterhead and said something about unpaid dues, violation of subdivision bylaws, and a fine for improper land maintenance. I remember staring at it, half laughing, half in shock. My land wasn't even inside their subdivision boundaries. It never had been. I thought it was a mistake, so I called the number listed. That was my first real introduction to the president. She didn't ask for my name. She didn't check any records. She just started talking like I was already guilty. According to her, my mother's property had been reassigned into the AOA map after community updates were filed with the county. And since I hadn't been attending meetings, hadn't been paying dues, and hadn't gotten approval for the repairs I'd been making, they were going to start enforcement. Enforcement, in her words, included fines, liens, and potential sale of the property if necessary. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. At first, I tried to be civil. I gathered my mother's paperwork, including the deed she'd kept folded neatly in a fireproof box. I emailed the HOA, attached a copy, and explained politely that their jurisdiction didn't extend onto my lot. I even highlighted the county plat maps that clearly marked the subdivision boundary ending at the creek. My land was on the other side, always had been. I got no response. A week later, I got another letter. This time, it wasn't taped to the door. It was mailed certified. Inside was an official violation notice stating that if dues weren't paid within 30 days, the O board would move to auction the lot for delinquency. They wrote that like it was nothing. Like my mother's land was a used car they could tow and sell for scrap. That's when something in me shifted. I stopped being confused and started paying attention. I didn't yell. I didn't storm their office. Instead, I went to the county courthouse. I pulled every record tied to that property going back to the 1940s. I photocopied the original deed, the plat map, and the subdivision formation documents. I even found the surveyor's notes that marked the creek as a natural boundary line. That could not under county zoning law, be altered by any HOA filing. I built a folder thicker than a phone book. At the same time, I started documenting everything they sent me. I kept every letter, recorded every voicemail, and took photos of every notice they taped up. I learned that under state law, even an attempt to place a lien on a property outside an HOA's jurisdiction could be considered fraudulent. And fraudulent liens had a way of getting board members sued personally. I didn't tell them any of this. I let them keep writing. I let them dig their hole deeper. Meanwhile, the stress started showing. Neighbors I'd known for years stopped. Waving. Word spreads fast when an HOA paints you as non-compliant. A cousin of mine worried I'd lose the land entirely. And there were nights I sat at that cabin table, staring at my mother's handwriting in the margins of old tax receipts, wondering if I'd fail her, but every late night of reading property law added steel to my spine. The more I learned, the more I realized the HOA had no leg to stand on. They were bluffing. They thought I'd fold, sell cheap, or walk away. They didn't know who they were dealing with. So when they finally ordered me to appear at their board meeting to settle the matter, I didn't go in unprepared. I walked in with my folder under one arm and my mother's original 1948 deed in a plastic sleeve. That's the moment I started with, sitting there while the president railed about how I'd been trespassing on community property. Their lawyer puffed up like he already owned the place, and me silent, calm, until I slid that deed across the table. The county seal caught the light. Her name, her date, her purchase. Untouched by all their little power games, the lawyer leaned in. Read it, and I could see the exact second he realized they had nothing. He whispered something sharp to the president. She blinked at him, blinked at me, then sat back in her chair. Like the air had been sucked out of her, I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. That one document said everything. After that, things unraveled quickly. The board went quiet for a few weeks. Then 2 members resigned. I heard through the grapevine that the president was facing her own lawsuit from another homeowner for overreach. Their threats stopped cold. The notices vanished. The silence that followed was better than any apology they could have offered. Now, when I drive up to my mother's cabin, the neighbors either wave carefully or look the other way. Either reaction is fine with me. The land is quiet again. The cabin still stands. The creek still runs the way it always has. And the original deed, my mother's deed from 1948, sits framed above the fireplace. A reminder that paper, when it's the right paper, can be more powerful than any HOA president screaming across a table.